Welcome everyone to my how-to video on writing your introduction and concluding sections of your SWOT report. So just to remind us of what we're supposed to do in those sections, I want you to scroll down in our Moodle page to week 5. And in the overview, you'll see this Word document link called SWOT Outline. If you click on that, this is what will pop up. And it basically just gives you a brief description of what you write in each section. So I'm going to be focusing on the intro and the concluding section. Okay, so for your introduction, this is a little different than what you may have written in the past. What I'd like you to do is simply profile the business. And so to expand on that, I have some key points for you. The first thing that you should do is keep in mind that you are not making arguments in the introduction. Save that for your SWOT sections. If it's a chain, so you should be profiling a small local business to you. If it's a chain, you should pick a specific branch or location. Otherwise, you're going to either be writing a report that's far longer than it needs to be, or you're going to be writing too little content to cover an entire chain. So focus on a particular location. The first sentence of the intro, it's a good idea to begin with a business is statement. So whatever your business name is. So for example, I might say Espresso Royale is a local chain coffee shop, ... And then you can expand on that, okay? So this is an easy way to give your reader a basic overview of what the business is. So if we take a look at our examples, so these examples can be found on our Moodle page. Here are PDF files of both examples, and here is our commentary on Dear 72. So if we look at the Dear 72 example, in the intro, it begins with a business is statement. Dear 72 is a Korean clothing and beauty store located on the campus of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Straightforward. It gets your reader into the content of who you're talking about. Let's look at the Milk Tea House example. So very similar. Milk Tea House is a local dessert restaurant located in Champaign, Illinois. A little bit more basic than the other one, but it's okay. It gets us started. So that, I think, is a really great way to introduce the profile of a business. You give a one-sentence overview of what it is in general. Okay, after that, you should likely have multiple paragraphs because you're going to be profiling particular topics about your business that are going to require quite a bit of detail. So every time you change a topic to some other aspect about the business, you should be changing paragraphs. And this is why we have section headings. So as long as you have a section heading, your reader knows that every paragraph in that section is the introduction. Okay. Do not make arguments in this section. This is entirely descriptive, so you are just presenting facts as they are. At the very least, you should cover the history. So when was it opened? Who opened it? What's the current ownership? What kind of business is it? Is it a micro business? Is it a non-for-profit? Stuff like that. So this is very much an extension of an earlier assignment in which you did very basic research on a local business. And it's completely fine if you want to do the SWOT report on the same business that you did that initial research on. You should have probably have a paragraph on location. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, how could I write an entire paragraph about location? Well, there's lots of details that you could profile. Its address is the most basic part, but if it's a chain, you should probably describe where the original store was founded, how many locations there are and where your particular location is. Describe the area, describe the internal location, things like that. You might even talk about where all do they sell their products. Do they also have a food truck in addition to a brick and mortar location? Do they sell online? Okay, so location can actually be pretty lengthy. You should definitely have a paragraph on the products and services. So what are the major categories? And you can, in your descriptions, even emphasize which products are the primary products and which ones are secondary. If you wanted, you could even do a price range. So you wouldn't go into detail about every single item, but just a price range would be fine for the introduction. You definitely, absolutely need a paragraph on consumer demographics. So who are our primary customer groups? So there may be multiple groups. And again, primary and secondary. So for example, Dear 72's primary target demographic is Chinese international students. However, there may be other secondary audiences. So maybe 70% of Dear 72's customers are Chinese international students. There may be smaller percentages who are other groups. So you can profile who they are, and give us some details about that. This is essential because every section after the intro relies on your reader knowing who our customers are. If you do not tell us who your audience is or who your customers are in the intro, then I won't be able to tell whether a strength is a strength. I won't be able to tell if a weakness is a weakness unless I know it's something that our current target demographic values. Okay, so this is incredibly essential to the logos of your overall SWOT. So make sure you do the research on the market and figure out who are our current customers so that the rest of the sections you can constantly be saying, our current customers don't like this or our current customers love this. Okay, all right. And then any other topics about the business that may be used as arguments later. So again, you're not making arguments in the intro, but it is a good idea to profile any topics or aspects about the business. So to tell you what I mean, I went ahead and made a list of our topics from the Dear 72 example. So if we return to our Dear 72 example, basically what I would do is I would highly recommend that you write the introduction last. Even though the intro comes first, you really need to know what you're introducing before you can introduce it. Now, maybe your writing process is one where you plan very heavily in advance and you can outline all of your points and know exactly what you're going to say and exactly the evidence you're going to produce, in which case you can probably draft this from beginning to end in chronological order. However, I find that in most cases, we are still discovering some of the key ideas as we write. And so in that case, it's really best to wait to draft your introduction until you've written the rest of the report. So let's say you've done that. You've written the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats section, and you've also written your conclusion in which you make your recommendation. Now you know exactly what to introduce because all you have to do is go through all of the topics, and if you have many intros in your sections, this will be much easier. All you have to do is go to each section, make a list of each topic, and figure out, okay, is there something about the business I need to profile to set this argument up? Again, you're not arguing in the intro. You are just profiling topics that later sections can make arguments about. So for example, the Dear 72 example would need to profile in the introduction the location because in the strengths section, it claims that the location is popular. So in the intro, I would just simply describe the location and what's around it. That way later, my strengths section can argue aspects about that location are popular. It also talks about great prices and quality. So I would, in my intro, want to give at least a range of prices and maybe describe what aspect it is that makes it quality. What is it made of? Is it, made of entirely organic items, stuff like that. So again, in the intro, I would not be claiming it as quality. I would simply profile the description of what the products are made of that makes it quality. Unique selling points, so is basically that the products are Korean, authentic Korean styles. And so in the intro, I would simply want to say, everything sold in the store is based off of Korean culture or style. I wouldn't argue in the intro that it's unique to the US. that's a little bit too much into argument. I would probably just save this phrase until the strength section. So you can say that it's based off of Korean style. And that's all you need to do. You might even describe like what aspects, what does that mean? What does that look like? Okay. And then here it brings up in the strengths that the brick and mortar store is a strength. So again, in the intro, I would simply describe what are all the mediums through which they make sales? Do they sell online? Do they have multiple store locations? And in the intro, I wouldn't argue anything about those locations. I would just simply say this is how they sell their products. So other topics from other sections includes lack of brand recognition. So for the intro, so the weaknesses section claims that there's a lack of brand recognition. In the intro, I would simply say, maybe describe what the logo is, describe how they advertise. That's it. And then other topics include horrible infrastructure. So it claims that, you know, the system by which they keep records of sales and everything is the reviews online are not great. So in the intro, I would simply say what program they use. So they use Square. And so in the intro, I would simply say they use Square to do to keep track of sales, and maybe just describe what Square is. And then in the weaknesses section, that's where they can argue that Square is not great. Okay, so you get the idea. You basically go topic by topic and figure out what you can profile about the business in the intro without making arguments. Okay, so you should probably also end on a thesis. So the very last sentence of your introduction, this is pretty common, conventional. End with a single sentence that is your thesis, and your thesis is the overall point of your document. So the overall point of the SWOT report is to make a recommendation for what you think the business should do next. And so this is why writing the intro last is so helpful, because we the writers figure out what our recommendation is once we write the concluding section. So once you have drafted the concluding section, now you know exactly what you are going to recommend, and you can draft your thesis and put it in the intro. So why do you want to do that? So this sentence would simply look like, the best next step for Dear 72 would be to invest in a marketing strategy that involves, and you could even specify one or two things in here of what that might involve, but you don't want to go too far. And so the one reason why you want to do this in the intro is because nothing should be a surprise when we reach the end. By the time we reach the end of your report, we should be convinced. Well, if we don't know what you are trying to convince us of as we are reading your arguments, we may not realize by the end how well argued that point is. So you tell your reader what the thesis is up front, and then as they're reading your arguments, they are already making the connections themselves. All right. So don't think of your report as trying to give them an aha moment at the end. The end, they should know from the beginning what you were trying to argue, and what they are trying to find out is whether you're right or not. Okay, so that is basically the introduction. Begin with the business is statement, profile in individual paragraphs, key content, group them by similar topics into one paragraph if you need to, and then end on a thesis. That's your intro. The intro should not be very long compared to all the other sections. The intro should not be longer than any one section. It shouldn't be longer than strengths. It shouldn't be longer than weaknesses. But make sure that you hit that content. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. Are you introducing all of the content necessary for this section? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the last section of your report, which is the conclusion. So this will be its own section. It will have its own section heading. And this is where if you look at our outline, you are expanding on your recommendation. Okay, so you are synthesizing your ideas into a single recommendation and explaining how you came to that recommendation. Now, if you've done your job in the other sections up to this point, every body paragraph should end on a mini conclusion, a concluding sentence, basically making a recommendation for that particular topic. So if you've done your job along the way, writing this last section should be incredibly easy, because all you have to do is to synthesize, you put all of those concluding sentences together and you look for a pattern. You look for a recommendation that would overall fix the most things, improve the business overall, reach more people, etc. Okay, so in your concluding section, you're looking for one big recommendation that you might think of this as like a year-long project. Okay, and then you should synthesize all the reasons why you've come to that recommendation. So the first sentence, begin by stating what the recommendation is, just straightforward, okay? So that your reader has a basic idea of what you are recommending. So if we look at our Dear 72 example and scroll down to the concluding section, it begins with, it would be in Dear 72's best interest to implement a marketing strategy plan. Done. Okay, so your reader understands what the recommendation is, and then you can expand on that. So what Dear 72 does next is it connects, it relates it points from the rest of the SWOT to that recommendation. Now, you are not going to be able to connect all of your arguments, all of the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats to this recommendation. I would not try to force you to do that. It would not be logical. But you do want to pick a recommendation that ties together as many points as possible. If you pick a recommendation that really only draws from one argument, your recommendation is going to be illogical, it's going to be weak, and you're not going to score very high on your logos. So try to come up with a recommendation that ties in as many points as possible that clearly has a logical connection. So that's what you do next in your concluding section. In 3 to 7 sentences, I think is a nice brief way to do this. You want to say how specific topics, specific points from the rest of the report supports that recommendation. So if we take a look at our example, it does that. So it begins with the strengths, it moves on to weaknesses, and so on. So the strengths that Dear 72 has are more than enough to render it a successful business. That's kind of a nonsense sentence. Dear 72 should focus on the unique trending Korean beauty products to provide a stable revenue stream that will grow along with the trends in the beauty industry. This is great. So this sentence is a great example of connecting a strength to your recommendation. So they take a particular strength, which is the Korean, trending Korean beauty products, and say basically that the marketing strategy should focus on that identity. Okay, it's our biggest selling point, it's trendy, so we should make sure that any marketing strategy includes an emphasis on this identity. Okay, so that's how they did it for the strengths. And so once you're done tying in all the points from strength that are relevant, then you move on to weaknesses. However, if people do not know that Dear 72 carries these products, then there will be no change in business. This is why the lack of brand recognition is a weakness that we should be addressing first. Remember to not use we, but so they don't, which is great. They just say that should be addressed first. And so here they are tying in the key weakness from that section to why marketing is so important. This one's fairly obvious, but you still need to say the sentence or else your logic will seem incomplete. Okay, so make sure that you point it out to your reader so they can agree or not. If you've done your job by this point, they should agree. You should have already proven this point. You are just tying them together. Next, one problem in this example is that they don't tie in any opportunities. They forgot to talk about opportunities. So if it's marketing, I might add, one of the opportunities that they talk about is trying to target non-Chinese international students. So my question was, could they market to other customer demographics? Who else is Korean fashion becoming popular with. And so if they could have included a thought about expanding to, non-Chinese international students through this marketing plan, that would have tied in opportunities as well, and I think it would have been logical. Then they tie in threats. The only threat currently facing the store is that there are other companies that are better established in logistics. And then Dear 72's response to these threats should be taken advantage of. This is kind of a vague way of tying it in. You should really just straightforwardly say, in order to combat and name the particular competitor, I think it was Urban Outfitters. So to compete better with Urban Outfitters, the marketing plan should include what? Okay. How will your marketing plan target that particular threat? And then finally, what they do last is they expand a little bit more on what that marketing strategy would include. And this is great. So you can think of this as your call to action. And so you should, if you don't want to do it here at the end, you can do it at the beginning, right after your first introduction. So we could move this up here. Okay, so either place would make sense to me. So you begin with your sentence explaining overall what the recommendation is, and then you expand on it, and then you tie in those key points. You can also end on further explanation of your recommendation. You could end the paragraph on this. So either way, I think would work. Now, one thing you definitely want to try to focus on, so whatever the reader sees or hears last, that is going to be emphasized in their mind. So we want to make sure that the last clause of the last sentence is a shared value, something that our reader really values. And so let's take a look at how they end their conclusion. Okay, so the very last clause, the higher website visibility will increase brand recognition. Okay, this is an okay shared value. You might have them expand on this and emphasize why overall increased brand recognition is important. Increasing, I don't know, the inflow of new customers. Okay, so whatever you end on, this is where you kind of have an emotional impact. So this is part of pathos. You want to end on something that they really value, to remind them that if they do what you tell them to do, they will get something they want out of this. So try to end on something that they value the most when it comes to making business decisions. Okay, and then once you're done with that, your conclusion is over. The conclusion is probably going to be the shortest section, but just make sure that you touch on all the points and be specific, okay? When you're bringing up arguments from other sections and tying it into your recommendation, bring up the specific topic. Don't just say our strengths are going to be great things to advertise. That isn't going to be effective. You should actually bring up the specific strength and how your recommendation can incorporate it. Okay, well, I hope this video was useful, and if you have any questions about executing these tactics well, please feel free to email me or bring those questions to our virtual classroom. Good luck.